After being undocumented for 19 years in the United States, I'd like to take you through part one of the ramifications of my undocumented status, including feeling behind in life, living in fear of deportation, feeling like my struggles were invalidated, not being the perfect immigrant child, and of course, being selfish. I've left timestamps in the description box for your use. When I lived in the US, and especially after I turned 16, I always felt like I was behind in life, but it wasn't by choice, which is what made it so much worse for me. When I look back, I see all the circles that I occupied that only compounded to make my situation a lot harder. I feel like I was always trying to prove my worth, always feeling like I had to fit this narrative of an immigrant who was deemed worthy. It was someone who was deemed worthy to be considered, maybe to become a resident one day, when that was very hurtful and very harmful for me, especially as a young adult trying to find herself and navigate all these extreme challenges that I was already coping with. Time and time again, I found myself in these places where I didn't know what to do. I felt lost. And now looking back at it, it wasn't that because I wasn't competent or because I didn't know what I was doing or because, whatever, I'm just trying to figure life out. But it was because on top of being a young adult and having to enter spaces that people before me hadn't, like being college educated, I had to figure out and navigate barriers that others couldn't help me with. One big thing I can think about was when I was trying to go to college, my guidance counselors and even some of my teachers, they didn't understand or comprehend the extent of what it meant to be undocumented. Honestly, didn't even know I was undocumented until I approached them with with the intent to figure out some of these answers as to how I would navigate this complexity of what it was to pursue a higher education when I was an immigrant and I was undocumented. But they didn't have these answers because there were many of us to begin with. And so I always felt so alone, so helpless because people that were there to help me sometimes didn't have the resources or tools or even knowledge to be able to do so. And so I always felt behind in life because I didn't know how to get to that next step. I didn't even know sometimes what that next step was because, again, I grew up knowing what my parents knew, what people around me knew, which is sometimes not the same as what I wanted to know, what I wanted to pursue, the knowledge that I was seeking. And of course, I knew that my status played a big role, but in a way, I almost felt like it was my fault. I was doing something wrong. I wasn't working as hard as I should have been. Maybe instead of working full time and going to school, maybe I should have tried to figure something else out so that I could spend more time in school and maybe somehow I would have been a better candidate. Maybe there would have been a loophole that I could have pursued. Maybe there would have been an internship that didn't look at my status, but I kept blaming myself for being behind in life. When in reality, I have to remember that I didn't have the same starting point as my peers, but try to explain that to someone so young who's trying to figure out things, who doesn't have the guidance that they need to get ahead. And it's a really hard thing to do. In my last video, I shared the story of how my father was detained and deported and the effects that it had on me and my family. When I think back to this deportation, I now see that that really affected me and the years since that happened until the day I left the United States. I became painfully aware after that event that I was not safe and that I would never be safe as long as I was undocumented. It is one thing to hear about people being detained and deported. It's one thing to hear it from a friend of a friend, from the news, but to have actually witnessed it, to see firsthand the effects it has on a family, it's honestly very terrifying. For me, for years after that event, all I could think about was that my name was on someone's desk, that my name was out there somewhere, that my relationship to this individual had put a target on my back. And so, like I said in that last video, I felt like I couldn't breathe because I felt like I was next. Older immigrant undocumented generations made huge sacrifices in leaving their family and friends in the only home they have ever known to venture into the unknown, not knowing what was in store for them, all with the dream to provide a better future for their children. As a child of an immigrant, I have known struggle, but I will never know the hardships and the psychological hardships that they face in order to bring me and take me to the place where I am today. Prior to self reporting and immigrating to Canada, my knowledge of an immigrant experience was toned down because I was a child. And so my experience was very sheltered. I was protected. I didn't have to go through what my parents did when they made the journey to go to the United States. And so, because I knew that they had gone through so much, I always felt like I couldn't speak to them about my challenges, my hardships, how I was feeling, because I always thought that they would see me as weak, as incompetent, as unwilling to take on a challenge and figure it out as they had, with much less. Growing up, I heard a lot of the ponte las pilas. It's a very common thing Mexicans will say to each other to just signal that you just gotta, get up, get it together, and you'll be fine. No matter how hard or the darkest place you could possibly in, it's a matter of you. It was always a really hard position to be in, to feel like you couldn't speak freely about the hardships that you were in. Because of the immense sacrifices that were made for me, I always felt like I had to repay back and do exactly as my mother saw fit for me, because she had already sacrificed so much for me. Because there was a misalignment between what she wanted and because I wanted, I felt like I was always a disappointment and that no matter what I did, I would never be the perfect child. Part of being the firstborn and part of being a woman really put me in this really bad position from the get go. Because I was the firstborn, I don't want to say I was a guinea pig, but I kind of was, in the sense that my mom was still trying to figure out the type of parenting she wanted to do, the type of discipline, the expectations, which of course, being the first one out of the gate made them really high. So even though I was a good student, even though I was trying to pursue a higher education, even though I was trying to be very involved, even though I was trying to better myself, because she didn't have to go through this herself, because she wasn't used to this and what it was to be, a teenager or young adult in America, there was always that struggle with her that I was never good enough. I was never a good child, that I wasn't listening to her instructions. I wasn't following the path that she wanted me to follow. When I decided that I wanted to go to undergrad, I remember that conversation going horribly wrong, because although I knew that was the best outcome for me long term, she didn't see it that way. She saw it as an unnecessary time away, as unnecessary money, unnecessary time, and more than anything, she saw it as me trying to rebel, in a sense, that I wanted to just leave the home and do whatever I wanted, because I think her idea of a perfect daughter was someone who would stay at home, maybe do a 2 year community college, maybe become a hairdresser because she saw that as like owning your own business, maybe becoming a bartender because they did those people do make good money, when it gets really busy, or something like that. And because I didn't want that, and because I wanted to pursue a 4 year education and eventually wanted to have a professional career, and because she didn't understand that, she always thought that I was just going against her, that I was wasting my time, that I was wasting my life. But more than anything, that I was moving, the fact that I was moving to a new city didn't sit well with her. And honestly, just education was just one thing of many, that always made me feel like I was never good enough, that no matter how hard I tried, I would never follow her expectations, because what she had in mind for me and what I wanted to do with my life were never in line. And to this day, they still aren't. Because I decided to take this very different path than the path that my mom wanted me for me, I felt extremely selfish, because I wasn't doing as I was told. I wasn't staying at home. I wasn't going to a 2 year college like she wanted me to. I left for university. I felt incredibly selfish when I left my siblings behind with her. Selfish, not calling home all the time, not going back home whenever I could, making decisions that long term didn't involve my mom directly, even dreaming of a future where I would benefit, but maybe she wouldn't benefit directly from it. I felt really selfish, almost escaping the nucleus of my family and dreaming of a life and a future that I wanted. That's not what she envisioned for me. I felt very selfish, not thinking of my mom and my long term plans, And that was really hard for me because I felt like very ungrateful. I felt like because of that immense sacrifice she had done for me, that I owed her everything, and that by not being and doing everything she wanted and everything she expected to me, that I was selfish. And the most incredibly selfish thing I did was leave, was not want to be undocumented anymore and self-deport from the United States. And there were so many actions even to this day that I take, that I do, that make me incredibly selfish, because now that I'm in a new country, I'm being selfish by trying to live my own life, by trying to create my own path, by following my own dreams. And that has made me feel like a very selfish person.